Alright, so coming off at the end of the previous chapter, we saw Kenjaku activating his domain expansion against Tsukumo. And coming into this chapter, we see like this flashback of Tsukumo and Tengen like game planning what they're going to do against Kenjaku. And Tengen says that he's going to dispel Kenjaku's domain. And he's going to be able to do this essentially because of the room that they're currently in. Tengen refers to this as each room is an empty barrier. And that's a sorcerer skilled in barriers can alter its structure. So in theory, if they can get Kenjaku to open his domain within this barrier, then Tengen can analyze Kenjaku's domain and adjust the barrier to counteract its vector parameters, which basically means that he could just neutralize Kenjaku's domain by manipulating the barrier within that room since Kenjaku is within it, and Tengen has complete control over that barrier. But Tsukumo questions that and says like, why don't I just use my own domain? But Tengen says that, well, the domain's outer layer, which is Tsukumo's in this case, would be the outer layer, and that hers would disappear before Kenjaku's, since that would be the one that would be affected by Tengen's barrier first. So Tengen kind of forces Tsukumo to go along with his/her plan as to where he's like, you get Kenjaku to open his domain, then I dispel it. And then Tsukumo just agrees. It's like, after he uses his domain, he will have burnt through his curse techniques and then I could beat him up afterwards. But they miscalculated, as it says, because it turns out that Kenjaku is actually activating a domain that hasn't closed its barrier, just like what Sukuna did in Shibuya when he activated Malevolent Shrine and it spread out to that huge radius and just cut up that massive portion of the city along with Maharaga. But another interesting thing here is that we're getting clarification, or I don't know, maybe a different translation possibly, because it's saying that it's a technique without closing the barrier, not that it doesn't have a barrier. So I guess it means that like all domains like have a barrier, but it depends on like if you close it, the way that we typically see like when they become like this sphere. But you could still activate a domain and just not close the sphere, but it will still have a barrier to it, which makes sense because that's where the guaranteed hits come from. Like the curse technique is like bound to the barrier, I suppose, and then activating from it. It's just simply not closed. So it becomes more of like a 2D domain rather than like a 3D one, if that makes sense. But since Kenjaku is doing this, Tengen is unable to do what he originally intended by counteracting its vector parameters, because now there is no outer shell to remove. But Tsukumo still goes along with the plan because she's not really aware of what's going on at this point, or at least I don't think she is. And she activates simple domain, but this just isn't enough. Like Kenjaku's domain is so powerful that it just eats through her simple domain. While this is happening, Tengen is also able to like improvise on the fly, where he says like, I'm assuming that the edge of the guaranteed hits area is its outer shell, and he'll erase it along with his empty barrier. So he's sacrificing the empty barrier in exchange to take out Kenjaku's domain. But first, let's talk about the sponsor of this video, Ridge Wallet. So guys, I know a lot of you probably don't have the best wallet game right now, but that's where Ridge comes in. Ridge makes these awesome minimalistic slim wallets that also have RFID blocking. This is the matte black titanium version. So the Ridge wallet holds up to 12 cards and they easily slide in just like this. It's so smooth, and it has a little notch at the bottom to bring them out even smoother. It also has a cash strap on the back, easily put in your cash, and it stays secure. But Ridge also has key holders. Just like the Ridge wallet, this thing has a nice weight to it, super sturdy. This is the gunmetal version, and it just holds my keys like a dream, guys. I love this thing so much. It even holds my gym membership, which is awesome. But aside from what I have, they also have over 30 colors and styles, including carbon fiber and burnt titanium. The wallets also have over 50,000 five-star reviews. So guys, if you're interested in getting yourself a Ridge wallet and a key holder, check out the link in the description or go to ridge.com/bigz, because right now you're going to be able to save up to 40% through December 22nd. So again, that's ridge.com/bigz. Thanks guys. But before he's fully able to nullify it, Kenjaku like hits Tsukumo with whatever his ability from his domain is here, and it seems like it's gravity, right? Like the way that it looks here, along with how Tsukumo's reacting to it and her just being like sent into the ground seemingly, I guess this is like his gravity curse technique domain, right? And I don't know if this necessarily means that this is what Kenjaku's innate ability is, like his quote-unquote gravity curse technique, which, you know, Tsukumo speculated about in the previous chapter. Like, that's what he used to defend himself against Choso's supernova sneak attack. Typically, like, the domain would have to be like the innate ability of the user, right? But with Kenjaku, he's like an outlier. We don't really know how his stuff works because he allegedly has up to 4 curse techniques. You know, he hops from body to body, obviously. He's currently in ghettos using curse spirit manipulation, and I'm pretty sure this isn't curse spirit manipulation's domain. More so seems like either Kenjaku's innate ability, or he can just use multiple domain expansions. And he just chose to use his gravity curse technique domain expansion. But anyway, Tengen dispels Kenjaku's domain by taking out that piece of the entry barrier, as we talked about. But the damage has already been done to Tsukumo at this point, and Kenjaku's like, you know, a fight with your own domain may have not led to such a poor conclusion. You should have never relied on him. So yeah, it goes back to what Tsukumo wanted to do originally, was like activating her domain and have it in theory overpower Kenjaku's, or at least have her go head to head with him and not just be vulnerable to him just completely overpowering her simple domain. But she relied too much on Tengen's advice, and, you know, as it said, Tengen miscalculated because he didn't expect Kenjaku to use a domain without closing its barrier. But then Kenjaku says the most interesting thing in the chapter, and he's like, Tengen has hidden something important from you, the culling games, and then he gets cut off. But this is interesting because this is going back to, like, Tengen is sus, which has always kind of been the narrative with him, more or less, but it was really brought up by Reggie when he was taking on Megumi, because back in chapter 167, Reggie asked Megumi, like, hey, how much do you know about the culling game? And then Megumi was like, well, it's a ritual for using cursed energy of players inside the barriers to take Japanese people to the other side so they're no longer human. And Reggie was like, oh, do you know Kenjaku? But then he also says, like, I think what you just said is a bluff about using players' cursed energy, or rather it's for a second or third plan. And then he goes on to explain the discrepancy in power between players and everything, and how if it was truly just for harvesting cursed energy, that they would want longer battles to take place. And then he eventually says that, like, you can be certain that Kenjaku will drop a bomb when only the strong remain, and then the culling game will have served its purpose. So we speculated about what that bomb dropping was for the longest time, because also in this sequence when he's saying it, we see Kenjaku like meeting with China's government, I think, or some government. And we thought that that tied into what we ultimately found out what he was doing with having like nations' militaries entering the culling game. But that could be it, but I also don't think it's that simple. Like, I think this has something to do with Sukuna, right? But going back to Tengen, after Megumi defeats Reggie in chapter 173, he asks him like, hey, what's your relationship with Master Tengen? And Reggie's like, oh, right, that shut-in would still be alive. And that's interesting because that's also what Kenjaku calls Tengen in this chapter. But then Megumi's like, okay, that's enough. Reggie said Master Tengen was bluffing about the objective for the culling game, and I have to consider the possibility that Master Tengen lied about that because he's secretly in league with Kenjaku, but Reggie's reaction makes it unlikely. So yeah, that kind of put it into our head, like, is Tengen working with Kenjaku? And I also think what he said at the end there is true, like, because if they are working together, why would they go through this whole ruse with Kumo and everything? It does seem like Tengen actively wants to stop Kenjaku, but maybe not necessarily stop the culling game, but just stop Kenjaku from absorbing him, right? Or just using him. And the fact that Tengen is the one who explained to the group what the culling game was pretty perfectly, as well as him knowing who Kenjaku was, him knowing that Angel was in the game, it makes you think, like, does Tengen want the culling game to happen, but just not necessarily the way that Kenjaku does? Like, maybe one of the binding vows that Kenjaku made in order for the culling game to take place was with Tengen, where it was like, hey, you know, we'll activate it, and then, you know, winner takes all, possibly. You get your group, I'll get my group, and then we can just both use the culling game for our own objectives. Because we still don't know the true purpose of the culling game. I mean, we obviously know what Kenjaku told us about absorbing Tengen, using his barrier and merging him with Japan and all that stuff and creating the big Uzumaki monster. That's not all of it. Sukuna is also still a big element of this, and I want to think that he's like the key here. But honestly, I just don't fully know what to make of this because we don't know enough yet, or at least I don't. Yeah, Tengen is still sus, but I don't think he's like evil. I think he's more so like a neutral force kind of. But anyway, we come back to Kenjaku taking on Tsukumo, and it turns out that she's not completely down after getting hit by his domain, because her Karuta Shikigami appears. He's like, well, Shikigami hasn't disappeared, and then she appears behind Kenjaku, and he dodges an attack from Garuda. He assumed that she's going to heal herself with reverse curse technique, and we weren't sure if she could do this or couldn't. You know, since she's a special grade, it's likely that she could, but I'm assuming that she can. But she just doesn't want to here because she's attacking Kenjaku, like bleeding, arm completely mangled. And he's like, you know, why won't you heal yourself? She's like, I don't wanna. And this is just, you know, crazy cool Tsukumo, disregarding her safety and health just so that she can go full berserker on Kenjaku, you know, keep the momentum going. But she's ultimately at her limit here. She can't really do too much to him. And Kenjaku's like, you must have thought you surprised me, but isn't there a better way of doing this? And Tsukumo's like, have you forgotten? I'd like the rough type. And at the end of the chapter, you see one of the empty barriers open, and it's Choso. Choso's back in the fight again. Now I guess he's had enough time to recover, and he's coming back in, but he also has a supernova with him, already charged up, and he's about to throw it at Kenjaku, and it's like, what's gonna happen here? Let me know what you thought about this chapter in the comments, guys, and if you liked the video, please give it a like, please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, I'll see you in the next one.